Hi, welcome to the chapter on 7th move sidelines for white in the Catalan. In the previous chapter or chapters, we had covered the main lines with Queen C2 as well as the critical knight e5. In this chapter, we would be going through all of white's alternatives on move 7 after castle dc4, and this is the starting point of the chapter. We have queen a4 here, which is basically a version of Queen C2, but this stops us from playing our beloved B5, and thus we can't convert to our main lines. We have Knight C3, we have Knight BD2, we have Knight A3, and we have A4. Let's start with, first of all, Knight C3, Knight BD7, transposes to a position which we'll check out in the later stages of the course. And knight bd2 is not a great move at all. Although the knight attacks the pawn on c4, we can simply play b5, and now the bishop on c1 is restricted by the knight on d2, while we have a great central space. We are ready to play bishop b7 next, and if we are able to consolidate our pawn, we should have a healthy advantage. I don't see any reason for white to try this knight bd2, and none of the top players have tried it so far. There is knight a3, and this has been a recent favorite of Magnus Carlsen. And the point behind this line is that after bishop into a3, we happily take on e3, which spoils white's pawn structure further, and white doesn't have an attack on the c4 pawn anymore. What was white's point? The point is, because we have given up our bishop with bishop into a3, white now has the pair of bishops, and the b file is open, which means this rook is landing on b1 and will put some pressure on the pawn on b7. We can't move it to b6 or b5 because of threats of knight g5, knight e5, and so on. White probably starts with a4 to further improve their position, and then play knight e5 and knight g5. And that is white's claim, basically. I'm not saying it's a good claim. I'm saying white has some compensation for it. What do we do here? This bishop on g2 looks very active. Our bishop on c8 isn't developed, as we have constantly discussed in our previous chapters. We want to get our pieces to the best squares and keep on developing pieces constantly. So we play bishop d7. The idea that we want to put our bishop on c6, where it neutralizes the bishop on g2. Even if we lose the pawn on c4, we are reducing white's activity. And if we are able to trade one of the bishops, white won't have the advantage of bishop pair anymore. And while white still does have the c1 bishop, this bishop was the more dangerous one. And by eliminating that bishop, we'll have a much better position. White basically now has three critical moves. There is queen c2, attacking the pawn on c4. There is a4, and then there is knight e5, which is the most concrete, putting pressure on the pawn on b7. Let's start with queen c2. Now white's trying to win the pawn back, and after that white will have a small space advantage maybe. But the issue is, after bishop c6, queen into c4, we have bishop d5. And the point is, after queen c2, firstly we have a great bishop in the center. And the critical point comes after knight bd7, where we are able to play the typical c5 and rook c8, eliminating this active pawn. And if we are able to trade it off and get one of our knights to c5, we'll have a very comfortable set of pieces. White's pawn structure is ruined, and thus I think black stands slightly better. In general, moves like queen c2 are a bit slow because you allow black to finish off their development. Remember, as white, you are strategically inferior, right? Because you have a pair of spoiled pawns, and you are a pawn down as well. White needs to show activity and momentum to compensate for the missing pawn. A4, on the other hand, was tried by Magnus. It's a very interesting attempt with the idea that the bishop comes to A3, where it's beautifully placed, but it creates an additional weakness and it's not very concrete either. So we can just continue developing our pieces, putting our bishop on the best possible square, and also vacating the D7 square for our knight. Bishop A3, rook E8. Of course, we need to defend the rook, get it out of the attack, and queen c2. White is trying to attack our pawn on c4 and develops a fresh piece. Rook c1 was tried in some of the games, but this is weaker than queen c2 because white doesn't stop us from playing bishop d5, which white does here in the queen c2 line because of some e4 ideas connected to queen c2. Although after rook c1, we can just play bishop d5 comfortably. And our idea is very straightforward. We want to play knight c6, take on f3 and take on d4. Knight e5. This is basically the only way white can try to win the pawn back. Otherwise, white remains material down without any reason. We take on g2, king g2, and here's a critical point. If white takes back with the rook, sure, I think white keeps some compensation because of the difference in activity of our pieces, right? White's pieces look very active, while our pieces, yeah, they are not so great. And thus, we are very happy to exchange this active knight on e5 for our inactive knight with knight c6. We are also threatening knight d4 with it. And if white plays knight into c6, rather than exchanging off with bc6 and spoiling our pawn structure, I would suggest playing queen d5 check, king g1, and now taking on c6 with the idea to play e5, open up the e file for our rook so that the other rook jumps to d8, and then we'll have two open active files for our rooks. Rooks belong on open files, as we already know. And we also have a better pawn structure since white's pawns are obviously weak on the queen side. And I would say black is slightly preferable here. Our plan, probably to get the rook in and try to push e5, then get the rooks to the active square and start harassing white's weaknesses, mainly on the 7th rank, the pawn on e2, the d2 square. You are looking to penetrate it somehow with your rooks. I'm sorry if you see a difference in my voice quality. I'm having a small cough, so please bear with me. Queen c2. White develops a new piece and is connecting both the rooks. What do? We play knight bd7. Our idea is very simple. We want to get a new piece into the game. And queen c4 runs into knight b6, where white loses the pawn. So the main try here has been rook a c1. The idea is that if we play knight b6, white has a5. And if not, after queen c4, knight b6, we can't ever play bishop into a4 due to the threats of queen into c7. The rook on c1 is brought to the c file primarily for this point. And if you take back with the knight, white can try to deflect this bishop with some knight d5 tricks and so on. So rather than indulging into all of those ideas, we can just very safely play a5, fix this pawn on a4, and then prepare knight b6. If white takes, now we can play knight b6. The queen goes back. If it goes back to c3, we can take with the knight and it attacks the queen on c3, which gives us a tempo to bring it back. White loses a pawn for no reason. And if white plays queen c2, now we take on a4 with the difference that queen into c7 runs into takes, and knight fd5, where we have a great set of active pieces. If you take on b7, of course, the rook gets trapped. That was the tactical justification for all of this. And if the rook jumps back, we just get a new piece into the game. I'm sorry, not this rook, the other one with rook a c8. And now we have great set of attacking ideas. Knight c3 is in the air, bishop b5 is in the air, knight c4 is in the air, and our pieces are just jumping around. And that brings us to an end of this line with a4. It's not a special try, but because Magnus has played it, I think it deserves some attention. The critical try is, of course, knight e5. So, white brings a knight to the center, attacks the pawn on c4, and attacks the pawn b7. Sounds ambitious enough. What should we do? This is the time where we are ready to spoil our pawn structure in hopes of exchanging all the pieces and then consolidating with bishop c6. Usually we don't want to do this, but because white has played knight a3 and spoiled their pawn structure, we can do that too. And unlike the line here with knight e5, knight c6, we are happy to trade because after knight c6, white recovers the pawn. In our main line with knight, where were we? Sorry. Yeah, takes, bishop d7, knight e5, bishop c6. If white takes on c6 now, the difference here is that we have an extra pawn after bishop c6, bc6. And that makes a lot of difference, right? The knight's not jumping around to win the pawn on c4. So this pawn is pretty stable. The queen's coming to d5, after which both the weaknesses are guarded, and white has no way to recover the pawn. And therefore, this is not a problem. While after takes, if white plays e3, if white plays bishop b2, we have the same response as we have for e3. We play knight d5. The idea, mostly we centralize a knight, put it on a more active square, which we are constantly trying to do. And secondly, we stop the g2 bishop from attacking the knight on c6. And now we are preparing b5, consolidating the pawns on queen side, and we'll have a great space advantage and an extra pawn as well. White has the pair of bishops, but we have an extra pawn. We have more space and we have better pawn structure. In overall, I just think black is clearly preferable here and keeps a healthy advantage. There is this seventh, this brings us an end to knight a3. And then there is this a4, which seems weird, but the idea is to stop us from playing b5. White now wants to play queen c2 or knight a3 and win the pawn on c4 somehow, keeping some space advantage. What is the obvious drawback? White moves a pawn in the opening without focusing on the repercussions of the move, and it gives us a juicy outpost on b4. What do? We exploit that with knight c6, and secondly, we prevent knight bd2 as well, because white was also threatening knight bd2 here. And with knight c6, knight bd2 is not possible due to knight d4. Knight a3 runs into knight a5. We use our knight to defend the pawn on c4 as well as threaten knight b3 and then try to win the bishop pair with knight into c1. White probably should play queen c2, trying to win the pawn back. We play knight b3, rook b1, and because the queen has moved, bishop d7. The point, queen into c4. And now, knight a5. The queen is attacked with a tempo, and the key idea is that after queen c2, we just play bishop c6, and there is this tactical motive of winning the exchange. White has to spend a lot of time avoiding all that, and if white plays queen c3, attacking the knight on a5, If we go back, obviously now white keeps an advantage due to more space. But because white has spent so much time with the pawns, the queen, we use tactics to our favor. We have developed all of our minor pieces and we play 95. If white plays queen a5, we have bishop d4 and the queen is trapped. This gives us a very healthy material advantage. And if white plays something like queen c2, we start dominating the light squares. Firstly, we occupy the outpost on b4 with knight b4. The queen goes back, bishop c6, and now we have a great set of minor pieces. White is obviously lagging in development and has weaknesses on e4, c4, b3, a4, and yeah, black seems to have a very comfortable position. Our plan is probably to play bishop e4 and then play c5 at some point, eliminate the pawn on d4, and then get all the pieces into the game. And that's why this knight a3 is not great. The other cunning idea could be to play a5 themselves to stop us from playing knight a5. This was tried by Fabiano and should be taken seriously. Rook b8. Now, what is our claim? We simply claim that we get rid out of the pin and then we want to play b5, which was not possible here because of knight e5 and the pin was bothering us. Now with the rook out of the pin, we can very comfortably play b5, take ab6 with ab6, and then trying to consolidate the pawn. Queen c2 runs into knight d4, which we are obviously not worried about, and we win a pawn. And yeah, that's it. White doesn't have sufficient compensation for the missing pawn. Let's go back to the main line with queen a4. With queen a4, white stops us from playing b5. And this means we can't transpose to the queen c2 main lines where we play b5 ourselves. What's the drawback? Well, the queen is out of the board, right? It stands on the corner, which means white is not really guarding these central squares that greatly. And we exploit this wonderfully with queen d5. This move is not common at all. I checked the database, and out of the 1900 games out here, there has been just 28 games, at least in the mega database, which appeared on the board. Um, so the point of this is that we are just guarding the pawn on c4 and we want to play b5, keep everything, right? Be greedy, just like VD. This is not common at all. And as far as I can see, there has been only a handful of top GMs who have played this move. There was Levon Aronian, and then there was some 2600 grandmasters, Casper Pieren, Idani Puya, and the Singaporean. There is Deek Bogdan. And the idea is the move queen d5 is not so common because of this reason. I'll explain why. So, most of the players, when they play dc4 and after queen c2, they want to play a6. And after queen c4, b5, we reach the same position after queen a4 and a6, queen c4, b5. Yeah, basically, we can reach this with queen a4 as well. Only for the specific players who want to play queen c2, b5. Yeah, queen c2, b5. This moves become, this queen a4 becomes threatening. And if white forces us to do something new, we'll do it, provided it be on our terms, right? And with queen d5, we are being very ambitious. White's obvious try here is knight c3. But let's start with the other sidelines. Bishop g5. White develops a piece, puts it on an active square, and the idea is to play knight bd2 or knight c3 on the next move. White probably wants to take on f6, force us to take, and then he try to play knight e3 or knight c3, knight e4. We play h6. We don't want some tension around this pin on the h4 d8 diagonal. takes, takes, we have won back the bishop pair. What does white get out of it? Knight c3, and now white has a small development advantage. We have just one piece developed, while white has done three pieces, right? But we have queen c6. Because we have a pair of bishops and we have an extra pawn, we are very happy to trade pieces. If white trades, we are more than welcoming to it because white takes a piece, forces us to take back and help us develop a piece with it, right? I don't know if I've mentioned this concept in the previous chapters. If I have, forgive me for not remembering it. But if I have not, I think it can be a useful guideline where basically when we have a possible exchange, ideally we want our opponent to exchange our piece so that our piece comes out on a better square, and the exchange helps us improve our position rather than our opponent. There are exceptions, of course, where the exchange might lead us to putting our piece on a bad square, or by exchanging ourselves, let's say queen into a4, the knight goes to the corner of the board. But in general, if your piece is coming to a better square, let's say from b8 we are coming to c6, you want your opponent to exchange rather than doing it yourself. I hope that made sense. So white's best bet is to play queen c2, trying to exploit the possible discovered attack on the g2a diagonal. We can play queen a6, controlling the pawn on c4, defending it. And our idea is very simple. We want to play knight c6, we want to play rook d8, get all of our pieces developed, and keep the extra pawn. White's most logical and consistent follow up should be knight e4, attacking the bishop on f6 and opening up the queen's vision for the pawn on c4. We have to come back. And this also stops the threat of knight c5, which was a threat on the last move. And we are following Adli Ahmed versus Levon Aronian here from a different move order. And Adli played rook fc1 here. His claim is that he doesn't want to play rook ac1 because the play is concentrated on the queen side, and thus he wants to bring more pieces to the queen side. Rook fc1 looks abnormal because you are keeping the rook on a1, but if you think about it from an abstract point of view, if you are trying to attack on the queen side, isn't it better to get maximum number of pieces on the queen side? And that's why he played rook fc1. We obviously are not worried, and we play knight d7. Our dream setup with knight c6 is now not possible because of takes, and rook takes, where the knight on c6 cannot move because of the weak pawn on c7, and our pieces are now uncomfortably placed. We lack space, and developing is easy. And that's why we play knight d7, and after queen c4, by the way, Levon played rook d8 here, but after knight ed2, white keeps some pressure. Levon's point was that queen c4 isn't good because of takes, and c6, which I completely agree. But this knight ed2 is very cunning because if knight d7, the knight jumps to c4, and then the other knight's jumping to e5. While if we start with knight d7, white can't play knight d2 because of c5 ourselves, a motif which we have seen repetitively in our course where we want to challenge white's space. And if queen c4, now we take back and play c6. And this is a good position to stop, evaluate, and consider our plans. So from a strategic viewpoint, white has more space. White also has active pieces, while we have the pair of bishops and we have slightly less space. So the material imbalance is basically pair of bishops for space and somewhat of activity. What should be our plan? Well, we want to gain more space with a5, a4, or we want to trade some pieces with e5 so that white loses the central pawn and thus the spatial advantage. The second part is to just develop our pieces. Now, how to put our pieces on good squares? Probably this rook comes to d8. The pawn comes to f6, guarding the pawn's important square on e5. And then we'll try to play a5, a4, gain space on the queen side as well. And somehow play knight b6, knight d5, try to get this bishop out with d7, e8, g6, and so on. It's going to be a slow battle because white doesn't have very obvious moves as well, but especially if we play a5, a4. I'm not saying we are better, but the position is very complicated enough, and the better strategic player should win here. I think it's a very decent position to play. By the way, there's also a plan of, let's say, I'll show you with moves itself. Let's say white plays a random move with h3, a5, h4, a4, king h1. And we also have this very interesting rook a5, getting the rook into the game via the flank, and now threatening e5, which would result us in getting a great position. Maybe we'll include a3 first, and then play e5 so that the pawn is not lost. And now the bishop's coming in. If we are able to open up the position, we just stand better because of the pair of bishops. Pair of bishops are great in open positions. And now we have developed all of our pieces. This rook will jump right into the game. The bishop would join the party soon as well. And yeah, this can be an interesting plan which you can look out for. So coming back to this position after queen d5, we have checked bishop g5 here. Bishop f4 was tried in the oldest game in this line with queen d5 between Grandmaster Andriy Sumits and uh, Georgian player. White played bishop f4 to threaten the c7 pawn, but this is not threatening at all. We can comfortably play b5, queen c2, and now white's threatening knight e5, trying to win the pawn on c7 with bishop into c7, or trying to win the rook with bishop a knight e5 and bishop into a8. What do? Queen b7. We defend the pawn on c7, and we'll comfortably meet knight e5 with knight d5. If white tries knight g5, we can just play knight c6, develop our piece, and we remain better due to the extra pawn. We don't have development issues, and we'll easily consolidate with h6, pushing the knight back, and then developing with queen b6, bishop b7, and so on. Remember that you have an extra pawn, and if white is not able to put pieces on the good squares, you'll remain better. Knight bd2 is another try, tried by Grandmaster Tigran Garimian from Armenia, I presume. Or I think he has shifted to France. Yeah, so France. All right. And the white's claim is that white wants to win the pawn either with knight into c4 and queen into c4 and keep the space advantage due to the pawn on d4. What's the problem? Well, we just play the typical b5. We force the queen back. Queen d1. We have seen this motif already. Queen b7. Get the queen out of the discovery ideas. Meet knight e5 with knight d5 and remain a pawn up. All you have to do is develop comfortably with a6 and knight c6 next, and you'll remain better. Queen c2. Now, we can play queen b7. I'm not denying it, but the strongest move is simply to play knight c6, exploiting that knight e5 runs into knight d4, and the queen is attacked. The queen cannot move, while if white plays bishop into d5, knight into c2, bishop into a8, and the very important knight into a1. We now are 2 pawns up, and white can't trap our bishop with bishop e4 due to knight into e4. You just have 2 extra healthy pawns, and computer already believes this is a decisive advantage. Let's go back. Sorry for that. Knight a3 was tried by one in one of the games against Grandmaster Kasper Pierre, who was the and pioneer of this variation and tried it very early on. White is attacking the pawn on c4, but without allowing b5. What's the difference? Well, we can just play knight bd7. If white plays knight into c4, now we have a double attack with b5, and it seems we are winning, but white has a small tactical trick after queen d1. If we play b into c4, white can try knight g5, trying to win the exchange as we can't blockade with knight e4. But after queen b5, bishop a8, c6, we counter trap the bishop and we want to play bishop a6 on the next move. We'll win the bishop sooner or later and then we'll have a small material advantage. So this knight into c4 isn't good. And if white plays queen into c4, we play bishop into a3, spoil white's pawn structure. Again, fairly typical strategy for us. Queen d5. And now we take back with the e pawn. Open up the e file for our rook. And after ba3, just play c6 with the idea of playing knight b6 on the next move. Then getting the worst placed piece in QGD, the bishop out with bishop f5. And then playing against the weaknesses on the light squares, the e4 square, c4 square, a4 square. The position is balanced according to computer, but computer also slightly prefers black, mainly due to the poor pawn structure. White does have the pair of bishops, but it's not enough to compensate for the poor pawn structure. And that brings us an end to the line with knight a3. And we now reach the main line with knight c3. White attacks our queen. We obviously don't want to go back without defending the pawn on c4. So we play queen c6. As usual, we are very happy to trade queens and then play b5. So queen c2. This is white's main move and the most logical response as well. White wants to play knight e5 and attack both the queen and the pawn on c4. There have been some other tries, namely queen a5 and knight e5. Let's start with queen a5. What is white claiming? White wants to swing along the king side with queen g5 and then try to create threats here. But this doesn't bother us. We can safely play b6, trying to develop our bishop onto b7 and then neutralizing this bishop on g2. White's critical try is queen e5. If white plays queen g5, we can reduce the pressure on this diagonal with knight d5 with the threat of playing bishop b7 on the next move. And if white plays queen g4 with the idea of playing bishop h6, we just play rook d8. This rook defends the knight on d5, creates additional support to the d5 square, and we can safely meet bishop h6 with bishop f8, defending the pawn. We have no problems whatsoever, and we might even try to open up the position with f5 or e5, exploiting the poor positioning of the queen and the fact that the bishop on c8 attacks the queen on g4. The position is balanced, but we have all kinds of chances. And if white plays queen e5, with the point that if we play bishop b7, white has knight h4. And if we can't play knight d5 because the queen is not attacked. But we can just play queen d7, preparing bishop b7 and now knight c6. Knight cannot move due to knight c6. The pawn on d4 is weak, and if we get bishop b7 and knight c6 in, we should have a very comfortable position. As usual, queen into c6 here isn't great because it allows us to bring our knight to the game with knight into c6, and we remain slightly better due to the extra pawn. Knight e5 isn't also good. Usually, this is a good strategy, forcing your opponent to take, but the issue is after queen a4, knight a4, the knight goes on to the corner of the board, doesn't control the central d5 square, which we exploit with knight d5, and we want to play b5 on the next move. If we keep the extra pawn, we'll remain better. Knight c4 is impossible due to b5. And if white plays knight c3, we just play knight b6 and we have a small advantage due to the extra pawn. Let's come back to the main line with queen c2. We play queen a6, get our queen out of the bishop's threats and defend the pawn on c4. Now what do we want to do? We want to play knight c6, we want to play knight b4 and then challenge the pawn with c5. What does white do here? The critical move seems to be e4. By the way, bishop g5 is possible here, and this is the move order which Aronian and Adley reached with. We just play h6, bishop f6, and we transpose to the main line. Maybe knight c6 is a better move here, but if you can cut down your work, just cut it down and play h6. Queen a6, e4. White gains space and wants to claim a strategic advantage with e5, pushing our knight to d5, after which this h7 square becomes slightly vulnerable and white will have some ideas of bishop g5. We play knight c6. The point is that e5, knight d5, this knight can't move yet because of knight d4 threats. So knight g5, bishop g5, bishop g5, knight d4 is the concrete point. And thus e5 is premature. We develop a piece, put pressure on the center, and white has two critical ideas here. There is rook d1 and then the main move a3. If rook d1, again a bit slow, allows us to improve with a tempo, knight b4, attacking the queen on c2. The queen moves and now challenging white's central pawn with c5. We get rid of the double pawns and then we have a very comfortable position. Our idea is very simple. We just want to keep developing our pieces, and if we are able to get all of the pieces developed, we'll have a dream setup. If white plays a3 here, now the point here is white wants to play e5, knight d5, and then play ideas of bishop g5, which was not possible earlier due to knight d4 threats, either with the c knight or d knight. But with a3, that is not possible. Right? So what do? We can't stop e5, but we can stop bishop g5 with h6. This is a novelty, and the idea is we want to play knight a5. But after e5, knight d5, bishop g5, we were worse, since there was now knight b4. White is threatening some knight d4 ideas. But with h6, bishop g5 is stopped, and now we can play knight a5. White's most ambitious move strategically is to play e5, although there are a couple of other moves to check. If white plays bishop e3, we can just comfortably play b5. Starting with knight a5 was possible too, but I like starting with b5. I think it feels a bit more intuitive. If white tries to open up the position with d5, which is what white should do because they have a better development, we just play knight a5, preparing knight b3 and bishop b7. We can then try to play knight g4, deflect the bishop, and then play bishop c5. Just try to improve our pieces altogether. The rook might jump onto d8, and we are having a very comfortable game. The more ambitious move here is bishop f4, attacking the pawn on c7, but we still play knight a5, sacrifice the pawn for activity by playing knight b3. Now our pieces are getting improved constantly. Rook a d1, gaining space with b5 and threatening bishop b7, after which we have developed comfortably and we'll have no problems whatsoever because of good positioning of pieces. This is quite active. After bishop b7, our development is complete, as well as the space thanks to the pawn on c4. Gives us a lot of fighting chances, and this is a position I'd always hope to get as black if I'm looking to beat a player. Let's go back. And the critical move is obviously e5. We play knight d5, centralize the knight, and we want to play b5, consolidating our material advantage. White's crucial response here is queen e4. White improves the queen and forces us to take on c3, after which white will remain better because this b file is open. There is some pressure along the diagonal. We don't want to take and improve white's position. So what do? We find a extravagant idea of playing bishop d8. The idea is that we want to play knight c7 and keep the keep the knight on d5. It's a great outpost. And if white plays knight into d5, by the way, there is also queen g4 threatening bishop h6, but we can start counter attacking with f5, ef6, and knight f6. Now we are trying to play e5 or b5 on the next move, and the position's sharp, but if we are able to play b5, bb7 or e5 and exchange of this pawn, we'll have a very good position. The critical move is knight d5, but here we are better after e d5, queen d5. White has regained the pawn, but opened up the diagonal for our bishop. Rather than starting with bishop f5, we improve our pieces constantly with knight e7. The queen goes back. If white plays queen c5, we can still play c6 with the idea of bishop e6, knight d5, and then squeezing out white on the light squares. This bishop would join with bishop b6 or bishop e7 next, and we'll have a better position. And if white plays queen e4, developing a piece with tempo, bishop f5. This was our plan, starting from bishop d8, and after queen f4, queen e2 loses material to bishop d3, white loses an exchange. Queen f4, we can't play knight d5, so we play queen e6, and now preparing knight d5, after which we'll start gaining space on the queen side with b5, a5, b4, and so on. We'll try to push pawns, control the increase our grip over the light squares, get this bishop developed, maybe put some pressure on this pawn and so on with c5. Black has already a slightly better game, and in fact, there's only one move which helps white to prolong the fight with d5. Otherwise, computer just claims this is a -1 position. Great outcome for us out of the opening. So that brings us an end to this chapter. Let's just summarize the key ideas. So the position starts, the critical moment starts from d4, d5, c4, e6, this, all of which we have checked. And now queen a4. Knight d2 is bad, restricts the bishop. We play b5. Knight a3, although this doesn't restrict the bishop, but spoils the pawn structure. Takes bd7. We want to play bc6, knight d7, and knight b6. If white plays a4, we play a5. Then, if possible, we want to play c5 and challenge the pawn on d4. a4, knight c6 with the idea of knight a5, knight b4, or rook b8, b5. Queen c2 allows, we have seen this already, I'm sorry, and queen a4. And we play queen d5, threatening to play b5, consolidating the space advantage. If bishop g5, we force the bishop to exchange with the knight, win the bishop pair, white wins a tempo, and the critical idea, queen c6, which we are using constantly in this variation, queen c2, queen a6, getting the queen out, and then playing rook d8 and knight c6. If knight e4, bishop e7, and we'll have a solid setup with knight d7, c6 after rook fc1. White has some space, but we have the pair of bishops. We want to play a5, a4, rook a5, get our piece out, and then try to exchange white's central space advantage with e5. If white plays knight c3, queen c6, as usual, queen c2, queen a6. We want to play knight c6, knight b4, c5, e4, knight c6, a3 to stop knight b4. We stop white's idea of bishop g5 with h6. We want to play b5, knight a5 next, e5, knight d5, queen e4, and the critical bishop d8. With the idea that knight d5, e d5, queen d5 runs into knight e7, and we have a great grip onto the light squares. Alright, so that basically sums up the chapter, and I'll see you in the next one.